Welcome to episode 7 of the Everyday Sens podcast. It's Monday, May 15th. I'm Jack Richardson, joined by Brennan Parks. And Brennan, lots to get into today as ownership bids are due as of right now. We're recording this Sunday night, but it comes available to everyone on Monday. So ownership bids are officially due. And we don't really know, I guess, how long the process is going to be after that. But how exciting is this day, Brennan? Because it's been a long time coming. This process has been very dragged out.
Yeah, it feels a lot longer than we were expecting to. I think if you would have asked me a few months ago or when this started, when we'd think it would be over, I would have said quite a while ago. Just keeps dragging on, but tomorrow will be a big day. I don't know how much info we're gonna get. I guess by the time this is out, we might know a couple things. But yeah, I mean, feel a little disappointed with ownership just based on the recent news, which we'll get into. But regardless, I think this is a big turning point for the organization and something that, if you told any Sens fan 2, 3 years ago that we'd be here today, I think they'd be more than content. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, and this might have felt so drawn out just because of all the celebrity names attached to it and all the different headlines coming out. And, we have to do our research on all these different groups and stuff, which is, you do your due diligence. But I mean, the big news, obviously, last week, which happened right after we recorded episode 6. So it was unfortunate timing, but that Ryan Reynolds is out. Him and Remington are withdrawing their bid. It was reported by ESPN, confirmed by Bruce Garriock at the Ottawa Sun. Not ideal, right? Because he was kind of the guy who everyone was circling, and he was the standard, even though he hadn't really done anything yet. It was more of a, he's done it in Wrexham. All his companies seem to do very, very well very quickly. So it just seemed like a match made in heaven. He's from Ottawa, partnering with Toronto Realtors, which would have been good for LeBreton. But it fell through because they weren't provided an exclusive negotiating window. So what I'm going to ask you is about this, because there were a lot of takes and a lot of opinions out there. Do you blame this on Reynolds and Remington, or do you blame it on the Galiotto? I believe I'm pronouncing that right. It's the firm that the Senators hired to handle the sale, a New York-based firm. Do you blame Reynolds and Remington, or do you blame Galiotto and the Senators for not allowing that exclusive window to be provided for their group?
No, I definitely blame Reynolds and Remington, and there's so much, like, so many conflicting reports here because I mean, they are definitely out. We know they're not going to make a bid. But then, Elliot Friedman chimes in and says, okay, Reynolds could join another group. And Friedman's the most plugged in guy out there, right? And there's just so many different reports right now. The window thing, like the reason they dropped out, and I wrote an article on it too, but it really confused me. I didn't really understand. Like, I understand why it happened and that they wanted the window. I just don't understand why they thought they'd actually get the window, right? Like, 4 days before the bids are due, they just decide to drop out of the entire process when they were kind of considered the front runner by most people, right? It almost seems like it was a cop out in a way. I don't know. This is all just speculation, but I thought partnering with Remington was a bit weird for Reynolds from the beginning because Remington had the same thing happen when they bid on the Coyotes in 2012. They actually backed out of that deal too when they were kind of looking like they might get it because of the real estate opportunities. So I don't know like what's up with Remington, but I think their relationship with the league is kind of broken at this point. Um, Losing Reynolds would be just it feels so disappointing, even though we're going to be in a great spot. Um, I'm still holding out hope that he's going to join another group. I know Michael Anlauer would be a great fit for him if he did want to, but like Bruce has reported and several others have, he feels pretty disappointed about it right now, Ryan. I mean, I think again, he was in it for more than just the money and more than just the real estate. But like he said on the Jimmy Fallon show when he went on there in November, he needed partners with deep pockets. And at the end of the day, if Remington wanted to back out of that deal, like he couldn't do anything about it, right? He can't buy the team on his own. So I'm sure he's bitter about it, but we'll see what happens tomorrow. Maybe we get a little surprise.
Yeah, it's interesting. And again, I don't know if we're going to hear tomorrow. Like it might be another 2 weeks for all we know. They might have another round of bidding, God forbid. But uh, I think for me, I agree with you that it's on them because you can't, especially with so much public attention, not just because of Reynolds, but because of, bigger names. And for all, like, we have to assume that the window was requested after Snoop Dogg and The Weeknd were reportedly interested. Like that's my guess. My guess is that, because why would they do that in the first place? But um, as a bid, you can't prioritize them just because then it kind of you lose your negotiating power if you do that, if you're the Sens, right? And let's not forget, like, this isn't the just a regular sale. This is billions of dollars here. And you might think, these ownership groups have so much money they can, it doesn't really matter, blah blah blah. But they need to buy the team, and then they need to have enough money to operate the team properly, right? Like they're not going to have an influx of cash right when they buy the team. So you have to think about that, and that's also something to consider when Reynolds, if he wanted to join another group, because look, I'll give a little bit of credit to, or not, sorry, not credit. I guess I'll kind of criticize, I guess, the Sens and the firm that they hired, because I think part of what was reported is that Reynolds and Remington were frustrated with how long the process was, and that's completely fair because he was publicly interested in November. Um, picked like I don't know. I don't want to say that the Sens are taking too long here, picking their picking their best suitor, but they had more bids than they expected. I think that was written and stated. Like they weren't expecting so much attention. And in when that happens, you can drive the price of the bid up, and it's like it's a business at the end of the day. So I guess where I'm going with this is like if Reynolds was to join another group, you might think originally like, oh, why doesn't he just put whatever percentage he was going to have into another group, therefore making it the highest bid by a mile? Like I said, you can't do that because you have to have operating costs. You have to be able to fund the team and like pay rent on the lease at LeBreton. Like there's so many other little things to factor. So I think Andlauer might make the most sense just because isn't another celebrity already attached to it. But for me personally, now that he's out of the running, I think I'm all aboard the Nico Sparks train.
Yeah, and I've been talking about the Nico Sparks train too, and like I have this tweet where I put it. I said like his consortium is Snoop Dogg, Matthias Nordstrom, who's close friends with Daniel Alfredson, and they think Alfredson would get a role. Like it's been reported that he would probably get a significant role on the hockey operations side of things with that group. Trevor Daly, Grant Fuhr, um, and then but the problem and where people are drawing their lines with this group is that they have a lot of investors. So most ownership groups you look around and it's like one or two big investors, right? Like Andlauer. It would just be Andlauer pretty much. And whatever, you might have minor investors, but it's going to be primarily him as the kind of the known owner. With this group, we're talking about, 12 plus major investors. Nico Sparks wouldn't be the lone guy. I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing like everybody else does, though. I mean, you're getting money from Canada, from the US, and from the UK, and they're backed by the Rubin family, who are worth $15 billion. So you're talking about operating money. That group has the money if those Rubin brothers are really backing them. So would Reynolds join that? I mean, we come back to the issue with Reynolds now, and I think what he liked about Remington based on what we know, and again, I don't actually know, nobody does except for Reynolds himself, but I think that he liked the vision where he could be the face of the franchise because Remington was really interested in the real estate and wanted to do LeBreton, and that's why they wanted the window, which it wasn't fair of them to think they'd get it, but I get why they asked for the window because they wanted to know they could get a deal for LeBreton done, and they wanted more land than LeBreton was actually like expected to be. So yeah, I mean, I think with Remington, Reynolds had the opportunity to be the hockey face of it. Like he could be on the hockey side of it and be the face of it. I don't know if he's going to get that with any other group. Even Andlauer, like he's been around the hockey teams. He's a big hockey guy. I think Remington proposed to him that he could be the face of it, and he's not going to get that now. So will he come back in? I mean, the opportunity for that documentary that he wants to do is still there. I think. I don't know who reported it. Somebody reported that any group would be happy to have him right now. Like you'd be kind of silly to turn away Ryan Reynolds with how much popularity he's getting and attention he's garnered. Um, but yeah, I think I'm with you on the Nico Sparks train. I think Andlauer provides a lot of great opportunities too. I like him. The Kimmel brothers have the weekend involved. I don't really know a whole lot about them because they've been pretty quiet. And yeah, I don't know how many bids they're going to get. I think it's been reported that they think it's going to sell for 800 million to a billion still. The price might go down a bit, but yeah, other than that, they might get 4 to 6 bids. They might get 3 bids. They might get 2 bids. Right? It's anybody's guess.
And I mentioned, the negotiating stuff, and when it was reported that Reynolds and Remington had a $1 billion bid, I'm going to quote Pierre Dorion here: "We don't negotiate through the media." Like it's not an accident that these things leak, and I would imagine that leaking on behalf of Remington was perhaps a negotiation tactic. I don't know, maybe drive the price down a little bit for them. Like and that could have been part of the negotiating to get an exclusive window. And to be honest, look, like if the Sens don't end up selling for exactly $1 billion, I'm not going to fault the Sens for not caving on this thing. And yeah, it sucks, and we want Reynolds, and you can say that the league maybe should have stepped in and said, yeah, do what this guy wants. He's going to be great exposure, blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, like they don't get different rules than other people, and like I said earlier, I think I was saying this on Twitter the day that the news broke. Like, it's not going to be a bad situation. We have to go into this ownership thing, and yeah, you can look up the history of certain people and all like how they made their money and whatever, and what they've been doing. But at the end of the day, this is going to be a positive situation for the Ottawa Senators and the fans because look at the last calendar year; it's been pretty exciting in Ottawa. So anyone who comes in is gonna just kind of ride this wave, I guess is what I kind of mean. And I don't think that just because it's not Reynolds and it won't be all this public exposure like Wrexham's having, that ownership will be a bad thing at all.
It's just bittersweet, right? That's the word you're describing is bittersweet. It's like Reynolds was the premium, like the A plus 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 option. But then if you get an Andlauer, you get the Nico Sparks bid, that's like still an A plus option. Like we're talking about going from some of the worst years and days in franchise history. I would consider the last few years had some of the worst moments. Like there was some really truly awful moments for the Sens and for the league because of them. And we're going to a group now who I think, regardless of who it is, they're going to have a lot of money, and money is one thing, but I think like I'd have to look into some of these other groups a little more, but I'm pretty content with who the people are that are bidding
Yeah,
here. I mean, Nico Sparks obviously is a bit of a ghost, but he seems like a pretty respectable guy who's worked with the team and has a lot of, and same with Snoop, where they want to change the game of hockey and make things better. They seem to have really good morals and values, and this is something that we do need to look for because as much as we want them to be good for the Sens, we want them to be good people. Like we don't want to end up with another situation where we're into, some toxic different situations and stuff. So yeah, I think like you said, it's just bittersweet. Reynolds being out at first, my initial reaction was pretty heavy disappointment, and it has nothing to do with him being a celebrity. It has everything to do with the opportunities that came because of that, the marketing, the series, whatever it is. It just sucks to lose out on that. But again, you never know. And yeah, I think regardless, we need to be happy because this is a much better place than we were in even a year or two ago.
exactly. Yeah, and we'll leave the Reynolds discussion on this. Just what you mentioned, Elliot Friedman, just kind of saying how he could potentially join another group, and he was saying that the timing is very strange. Like it's very strange for. I would imagine that came out a day or two after the decision was made to withdraw. Like I don't think it was much time in between. So the timing is very curious. Like it's interesting that they even put it out now, and not.
Well, why not just wait until the bids are made and then be like,
That's
"Oh,
the
they
thing.
didn't make a
Yeah,
bid." Like, why would you make it public the week
yeah.
of the bids? It makes no sense.
Like if you're Reynolds and Remington, why not even just make a bid, but like no, you're not going to win, kind of thing. I don't know if money works that way. I have no idea, but like you know what I mean. Like the exposure that got had to be intentional on someone's part, whether it was the Sens or I don't know who Emily Kaplan's sources are or Bruce's sources, but whatever side they're on, it was absolutely intentional.
It'd be
Absolutely.
hilarious if they came back in and made a bid after all this. Like, there was some
Yeah.
speculation they could just make a last second bid and this was all a play to drive the price down. That would be so funny. Like, that would be
I
just
mean,
entertainment.
I don't even know how I would feel about that, to be honest. Like it's like what are
Snaky,
we
but
what are we doing here? Yeah, yeah. All right, so we'll move on from Reynolds, and I kind of want to get into a graphic that you put up the other day, and in a post and kind of a discussion about the Ottawa Senators' top four defense as it stands right now. So right now, what we're including is Artem Zub, Jake Sanderson, Jacob Chikrin, and Thomas Chabot. And Brennan, I'll let you kind of take the reins on this one. Your question was, can this be the best top four in franchise history?
yeah, and let me start by saying that this generated a lot of outrage, and Mark Mathod, I think, ratioed me a little bit. I don't even think he was responding directly to me. I think it was kind of a chain of replies, but my intention was not to say they are the best group because, like, don't get me wrong, Jack and I are young, and we didn't live. I don't know about you, Jack, but I have a hard time remembering 2005 because I was 4 years old, and that was a
Yeah,
young
yeah,
time. But no, like, we're not trying to say, or I'm not trying to say they were better than the Chara era and all that. I'm saying they hold potential to be, and I'll stick by that. I think like Jake Sanderson, and I replied to kind of doubled down by saying Jake Sanderson, I'm ready to say, and this is bold, but he will be the second best defenseman in franchise history behind Eric Carlson. Because this guy, I think he's going to be like a top 5 to 10 defenseman in the NHL for many years, and that's a big feat, right? So, um, yeah, I mean, I just think you look at this group, and I think a lot of people come back to the health too is a big thing, right? Chikrin has a lot of health problems. If you remove one of these guys from the equation, it kind of falls on Brandstrom and what he can do because that group then gets a lot weaker if you're missing a Chikrin type. I just look at these four players and I think of how talented they really are. And talent is a little bit different on paper than it is, in the actual game and on the ice. And I think that's important too, is we need to see them on the ice. And I agree with everyone replying with that, like, yeah, on paper they look talented, but we haven't actually seen them together because they were always hurt last year after they acquired Chikrin. So I agree. I think this season will be huge, but again, same goes for Shabbat. People are really upset with Shabbat and think he had a really down year and he's not this number one guy. But what is that true, or was it just a down year? Right? Because I think he's going to bounce back. I think he's going to be a legitimate top four to top pairing guy. And you look at these four, and I mean, Artem Zub is a little bit behind the other three of them, but these are all like I consider Shabbat, Chikrin, and Sanderson are all top pairing players, and it's hard to keep guys like that long term, and they should be able to with these guys. So yeah, what do you think?
Well, I was gonna say it's maybe not how the outlook of it, and it's like, oh, you got one pairing that's gonna score all the goals, and then one that's gonna shut everyone down, and because yeah, I think what it's lining up is Shabbat Chikrin, and that's probably your offensive pair between the two, with Sanderson and Zoo being more the shutdown. But I guess my point is kind of to what you said, like Chikrin, Sanderson, and Shabbat are all number one defensemen on an NHL team. I'll stand by that. I'll fight anyone on that, to be honest. Like, I think all three of them have potential or are already number one defensemen in the league. So I guess and like you said, we're a bit too young. I don't remember watching Zdeno Chara as an Ottawa Senator. I'll just admit that. But at the time, it was Volchenkov, Chara, Redden, and Phillips, right? I don't. I mean, who's the number one guy there? And is it another case where it's you have three different number one guys? It sounds like it might be, right? Like I know that Chris Phillips at the time was dominant in shutting people down. And I know Volchenkov was an absolute beast in just blocking shots and stuff like that. But to me, those four were so good based on what I know about the team and how good the Sens were at the time. Those four were just very good at shutting people down. They weren't. It wasn't dynamic offense or anything like that. And obviously, look, you also have to consider the NHL in the game has changed dramatically. So I think a top four then and a top four now has to look way, way different. So to answer the question posed below there, can this be the best top four in franchise history? Absolutely. Because like you said, it's all about potential. And you think about, I mean, I've talked a lot about Shaban, like you mentioned, like that could be what he is. He could just be a 60-point offensive defenseman. That's okay though. That's still a top four defenseman. Um, but I would say that maybe even Chikrin, but Sanderson especially haven't hit their potential yet. So to me, I think that's what's enticing about it. Whereas I would say Chara, I mean, maybe you can make the argument though that even Chara hadn't hit his potential in Ottawa. He definitely was better in Boston. I just mean like, was he? I think they were just all a bit older. Is what I'm trying to say. Like I don't know if you've got the ages there pulled up, but I
Yeah, I've
know that
been
Phillips was 1999, so he would have been, I guess, pretty young. Wow,
Yeah, well, Chara was in his best year, I guess best or second best. He was 28 years old. So like we're talking like 8 years older than Sanderson. Now, I will say when I looked at the numbers, because for whatever reason I haven't actually looked at the numbers of like individually for Chara and Redden and all these guys. It's just not something that's come along naturally. But I mean, Chara and Redden actually each finished top 10 in Norris voting twice within like a 3 year span. And Chara was in 2005 he finished fourth, and in 2004 he finished second in Norris voting on the Sens, which I'm not gonna lie, surprised me a little bit because the stories I've heard of Chara was that he was a goon who threw a lot of punches and broke
Yeah,
his
I
hand.
did not
So
know that.
yeah,
He
so
finished
this
second in 2004.
2004, yeah, finished
Wow,
seventh in 2003, second in 2004, fourth in 2005, and then Ottawa let him go. So that like that,
wow,
I mean, that makes it a little more interesting, and I see why people are so outraged because yeah, I haven't even looked at those numbers. I mean, say what you want, but
it's impressive.
um, it is impressive. Now, those Sens teams were ridiculously good overall, right?
Yeah.
Like when you're on a good team and an elite team who's, among the top three, top five teams in the league, that makes you a better player. And if this core is a top five team in the NHL through Sanderson's prime, he is going to be a Norris candidate every single year. I promise you, I'd bet everything on it right now.
Oh, and we don't like Travis Hamonic said this kid's gonna win Norris trophies. So I like that
Several.
quote from the Hammer. Yeah, yeah. But I mean to kind of counter what you said about being on a really good team, you get Norris attention. you are a good team because you have such a good top four. So I think yeah, when you're talking about one guy being like, oh, his teams weren't as good, that's a bit different. But you're talking about the nucleus of your defense core. You can absolutely be like, if they're not taking them to a President's Trophy, which is what the Sens in 2003 did with that top four, then you can make the argument that that top four was better. Now, if the Sens are a great team and then win the cup, that's a better top four than that President's Trophy team. So I think I'm going to I'm going to measure it by playoff success at the end of the day. But to answer the question, it absolutely has the potential to be. And I think what I'll defend you a bit there because it was a bit of outrage, and we'll get into another one that people on Twitter were mad at for some reason. But I think you meant more. It has the potential to be, and this is one of the best top fours that Sens have ever had.
Well, see, I thought that that was kind of self-explanatory because the way we're talking about a 20-year-old Jake Sanderson here, and Chikrin too is only entering his prime. So I kind of the way I phrased it was a little bit messed up, but yeah, I meant this is one of the most talented groups and projects to be, among the best top fours because again, it's potential and I come back to talent and skill and the modern age is a lot different than that 2005 era like we're talking about. I think even a Chikrin and a Shabbat and a Sanderson, these guys have immense talent and skill. Like they're not just shutdown guys. These guys are very, very skilled. And I don't know. I see a lot of potential, and I think they're constructed a little bit differently than that core was back in the day for Ottawa. Like you said, I think they're going to be a little bit more maybe offensive and able to contribute in that regard. It's a different game. It's hard to compare. It's not apples to apples. But yeah, I mean, we can leave it at that. I definitely, I see a lot of potential, and I think they could be the best top four in a few years.
The other thing too that we'll move on after this, but like you got to factor in longevity, right? Like how long are these guys going to play together? Because obviously, infamously, the Sens in 2006 picked Redden over Chara, and then the rest is kind of history there. But that matters. You have to factor that in into what's a better one. Like if they have this top four somehow for the next 10 years, then I think that's pretty elite. All right, so I kind of alluded to something else that people on Twitter kind of got mad at, and I guess right now it's Monday. So yesterday, I just tweeted out. I was like, you know what? Nothing's really happening for the Sens. It's the day before the bids are due. It's a Sunday night or Sunday during the day. Leafs were eliminated on Friday, so it's a lot of that circulating around. Like, what are they going to do, and what's going to happen with management and coaching and blah blah blah. So I tweeted out that I would be happy to have Sheldon Keefe and or Kyle Dubas in Ottawa next season. I believe I don't know how many replies have come in at this point that we're recording, but it was a lot. A lot of people are not happy about Keefe in general. I think most of the people said Dubas yes, Keefe no. And I don't know why. I'm very curious why. Playoff success, sure. But to me, and we've talked about this at like so much already. This is episode 7. We've talked about it probably every episode. That next year the Sens have to make the playoffs. So I don't really, we'll focus on what to do when you make the playoffs and how they can be a better team. And maybe this core can't even play in the playoffs. Who knows? But until we get there, I don't care about that. So when I look at Sheldon Keefe, I see one of the best coaches in the league in the regular season. And I don't know how anyone can kind of debate that. And it's more about the defensive side of the puck to me, which is where the Sens need the most help next season. Toronto is one of the best defensive teams in the NHL. So I don't really know what the problem with Keefe is. Like, to me, he's an obvious upgrade on DJ Smith, and that's no slight to DJ, but Keefe, I think, is just a better coach. So, Brennan, how do you feel about everything? Because I was just a little bit surprised at how many, like, I don't think anyone who replied and took the time to, which we are very thankful for. We always love that. Was in favor of Keefe. I could be wrong, but it was very, very against and very anti Sheldon Keefe in Ottawa.
Yeah, so I don't pretend to know everything about Sheldon Keefe. I get where people are coming from because for one, it's always hard to acknowledge that we want someone from Toronto, especially when they just got bounced from the playoffs. I mean, it kind of comes back to too that they just took DJ Smith from Toronto, and a lot of people don't like DJ Smith now and are unhappy with that. So it's like, are we going to keep taking Toronto's, seconds, and this is what everybody's talking about. So I don't know. I think you look past that. I think we can be more mature than that. Keefe in himself, the concerns with the playoffs are valid because Toronto is infamous for their terrible playoff streak, but I mean, the last 3 years before this one, or two, I guess 2 of the last 3 years, they lost to Columbus and Montreal in the first round, who were two. Montreal made the finals, but they were two pretty bad teams that Toronto probably should have beat. Again, though, it comes back to like how much of that is actually on Keefe, and we're not Toronto Maple Leaf scouts or pros here that know everything about the Leafs, but to me, they were losing before Keefe came there in the playoffs, right? Like they were not a good playoff team years before Keefe came there. I think that core is the issue, and that's what I come back to with Toronto is I think it's more the players. There is something inherently wrong with that team because Dubas even put together a pretty good squad, like admittedly, and they still failed. I don't know what is wrong with that team, but I think they should break it down. On Keefe specifically, yeah, we said the same thing with Gerard Gallant, right? I mean, they finished over the last 3 years. Toronto was first in the North, second in the Atlantic, and second in the Atlantic. They won 50 plus games each of the last 2 years. And they've been a top three Atlantic team in each of his 4 years as coach in Toronto. So I don't know. For me, like we said with Gallant, people are looking ahead, right? Because before you get to the play or before you win in the playoffs, you have to get to the playoffs. And I just think same with Gallant, they both have shown that they can do it in the regular season. And yes, you want your coach to be a John Cooper who stays there for 10 years plus and has this dynasty legacy with your team, but in reality, coaches have short lifespans these days, right? You want to focus on specific goals and like if Ottawa gets to the playoffs next year and they lose in the first round and Sheldon Keefe is their coach, is anybody going to be complaining? No. Like that's a win, right? So I don't know. I would be happy with someone like Keefe, but yeah, I'd be pretty much happy with a lot of the coaches on the market. So
Yeah, we just need a new voice, and we're fans and we cover the team, but like imagine the players, like it's time just for a new voice and a new like a lot of people make a big deal about the system, but honestly, I just think like it's got to be a new voice. So I don't know, like I don't know a ton about the Leafs either, but obviously in the playoffs I've been watching them a lot because they're on TV. Um and you're right, I think it's on the players. I don't know like I don't know how you classify someone getting out coached. Like I don't know how that like is it goaltending? Like me, I saw a lot of people in Boston saying that Montgomery was severely outcoached by Paul Maurice. Like, sure, I guess like, you could probably point to a couple things, but at the end of the day, like there's only so many adjustments a coach can make during a playoff run. Um, that I don't know if it's fair to point
well,
it all at Sheldon Keefe.
Marner's, Matthews, and Tavares combined for 1 goal in the second round. So if you want to talk about being out coached, like I don't know. I look at that stat and when you that's how much money is that? That's $30 million plus right there on
Yep.
your of your that's almost half of your cap.
Yeah.
And they scored 1 goal in the second round in 5 games, 6 games, 6 games. Yeah. So
Hmm.
I don't know. For me, it's just no 5 games. Wow.
It was
Yeah, that's
five. Yeah.
bad. That's
Yeah.
bad.
Panthers in
Um,
five.
I don't know. You look at that and they're probably gonna fire Keefe. I mean, they should because they need to do something different. But I don't blame it on Keefe when I see that Marner's, Matthews, and Tavares scored 1 goal in the second round. Like they all disappeared. How is that
Yeah.
not on the players?
And what are you like as a coach? Okay, let's say that's happening and you know your top guys aren't producing. What are you going to do? You have to play them. They're your best players. Like I don't know. It just kind of boggles my mind um, when I think this year actually in Ottawa to bring it back to the Sens, there were a lot of instances this season where it was it DJ Smith's fault, sorry, or was it on the players who weren't finishing? Because look, a coach can't put the puck in the net for you, and as much as we like to make fun of how they kind of just bring up analytics randomly in their press conferences, and it doesn't really sound like they're actually using them to inform their decisions. They were right about the expected goals and stuff. Like that's on the players. Alex DeBrincat and Drake Batherson did not finish this season, and if they did, you're probably looking at a team who was a playoff team, and that's just like it's just the fact. So as much as we want to, harp on the defensive game, I think I said earlier that the defensive side is the most important thing for the Sens to fix this summer. But honestly, if we're being real, it's 5v5 offense. That's what needs to change if they want to become a playoff team. Because I think they were 18th maybe in goals against at 5-on-5. I don't know if you can pull that up quickly. And I know their offense was just either a little bit below that or a little bit above that. But you need one of them to be like in the top half of the league if you want to even have a sniff of playoffs. And I think the offense is the easiest thing to tweak, just based on the talent they have. So yeah, I don't understand not wanting Sheldon Keefe because because of Toronto's failures. And I understand not wanting another guy who started there and blah blah blah, but um, I think he's a good coach, and he would benefit the Sens. He took the Leafs to another level, even if they didn't find playoff success. Like those couple of years with Babcock in Boston, they were not the better team against the Bruins. They weren't supposed to beat them, I don't think. So a year like this, like it's tough because they didn't really do well, and he doesn't have playoff success. But that being said, he would take the Sens to the next level.
Yeah, so I just pulled up the numbers here. This is kind of atrocious actually, but Ottawa had ranked 26th with 151 5v5 goals for, which considering their roster, they scored less goals at 5v5 than the Arizona Coyotes, for God's sakes. Now,
Wow.
it's a little bit different. I mean, I could put it over 60 minutes to balance it, and they'd probably move up to around 20th, but um, expected goals, they were 16th at 176. So they scored like 25 less goals than expected, which is just, I guarantee that's last in the league. Like that's just
Yeah.
brutal. That should never happen. You should be scoring more goals than expected with the roster they have. Again, I don't look at that as a terrible thing moving forward because that suggests luck. You're not going to be negative 25 on goals scored above expected multiple years in a row. That just doesn't happen. It's ridiculous. There's no way they will score or they will fail to score like that again. And I think that there could be a big jump because of that. Like, I really think that's an outlier. If you look at the next 5 years, it's going to be an outlier. Um, expected goals against, or sorry, goals against, they were 21st, I believe. They gave up the 21st most at 177. So to me, 5v5 defense is still a big problem. I think they gave up way too many high danger chances. I think they really failed to do anything other than stare at the puck in the defensive zone. Like that's what I noticed them doing all the time, even their best players. I wrote an article where I broke down, it was called One Indicting Trend Under DJ Smith. And it was that every single player that comes to Ottawa sees a massive regression defensively. And I shared proof. Like we're talking about numbers and facts. And expected goals against was kind of the main fact here and the main number. Every player that joined the team, I used this season, but it goes back to the past seasons under DJ. Every player saw big regression in the expected goals against when they were on the ice. So Ottawa was giving up way more expected goals than they were with their previous team, is basically what it comes down to. And like that was the same for Claude Giroux, who's renowned for his defensive play. It was the same for every player. Like every player's expected goals against got worse when they came to Ottawa. And to me, that just, and I went back years and it just kept happening. It was the same thing. It's like this is a clear trend that it's a red flag and it's something that you look at and you say, okay, clearly there is an issue in Ottawa because they are performing worse defensively than they did on other teams. And a lot of these other teams were not good teams, but they were still better defensively. So for me, it's defense is a problem, but yeah, this year specifically, goal scoring at 5v5 was arguably their biggest problem.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of my point. Is you can the smallest tweak to me for the team would be to score more goals and to finish, and not just, it's easier said than done. Yeah, yeah, but to finish their chances. And not that I'm saying that where their goals against was good. It's just if you can outscore your problems a little bit, which this team should have been able to do, and they did in a lot of games. To be honest, like a lot of high scoring games in Ottawa this season. Um, those kind of games should be enough to get you into the playoffs. That's what I mean. Like what was 20 expected less than they, or 20 less than was expected for them. That's not nothing. That's November. That's March. Like that's
25.
25. Like that's incredible that they it's just it's not good. So my point is anyway, that could easily have carried them into the playoffs this year, and then we could talk about, fixing defensive stuff in the offseason. Because even if they made the playoffs this year, I'm sure we'd have a discussion about DJ Smith being the coach.
For sure, yeah, and it's just it seems like a lot of fixable things, right? Like, and you can look at that in a positive or negative light because you can say this season it feels like they had a lot more potential, and this is what I keep saying is it feels like, I mean, if they could have won, like they were 3 games out of the playoffs. I mean, if they could have just won 3 of those November games when they went 1-10, and I think they lost like all of those games by 1 goal if you exclude empty nets, which is atrocious and ridiculous. If they could have just scored, one more goal in a lot of those games, and even I mean, if they could have scored one more goal in those games and gone to overtime, they would have made the playoffs in 3 of them, right? And that's not even half those games. So, I mean, yeah, I think this season there was a lot of fixable issues. I think you can look at it positively because again, next year there's no way they're going to fail to score that much. Like it's just bad. There's bad luck involved there. It's not all just like Alex DeBrincat sucks at shooting. It's there is bad luck involved there. So I think we can be positive about that. I am interested to hear your opinion on Kyle Dubas though, because I think Pierre, you felt strongly that Pierre should be you felt stronger than me that Pierre should be removed as GM immediately. So what do you think about Dubas coming in as a replacement if that were to happen under new ownership?
I'd love it. I think he's and like we talked about last episode where we just ripped into Dorian and DJ, more so Pierre, and we got a little bit carried away, but it's okay because it's the truth, just how it's the outlook of everything. Um, I think with Dubas, his biggest knock is those contracts, and he signed all of them. Matthews, Tavares, and Marner being the combining for 33.5 million for three guys. And the one thing I gave Dorian a lot of credit for was the contracts. So it's kind of a contrast, right? Like it's a part of the job, and Dubas didn't do the best job at it when he first started. And Dorian's done a great job at that. But other than that, I think Kyle Dubas has filled out that roster very, very well. There's a reason that they were a top five team in the league for the last few seasons. And again, like we said about Keefe, sorry, it's not just on the management and coaching. It like I think if you ask any Leafs fan right now, they would probably tell you that it's on the players, and it's kind of the same sentiment as Toronto as excuse me when they lost to Montreal. I think it was like these guys just didn't show up. Marner was a no show. Matthews no show. Tavares no show. Like that's not on the GM, right? Um, and I think what's good is that he's proven that he is going to stick by his guys. He's going to stick by the guys who have long term deals. He's not going to blow it up. And as a Sens fan, it's been good because the Leafs have just kind of stayed stagnant. But I think that's good because if the Sens go and kind of struggle a little bit and he's the GM, I don't see him taking an anchor to this core. Like it's a very good core that's been built here. We just talked about their top four defense has been very good, or assembled very well anyway. And it took a long time to do it, but it's been, this is a very good core that they have assembled. So I like the way he was able to fill out the Leafs roster, which is honestly exactly what needs to happen to Ottawa this summer. It's bottom six guys, depth defensemen, and goaltending. And I think Kyle Dubas did that very well in Toronto.
Yeah, and Dubas, like, admittedly, again with the Leafs, I like a lot of the players they've targeted. Like they've targeted well on the pro scouting side of things, which is where Dorian and Ottawa has really struggled. Dubas seems to have like a good grasp on what makes a quality NHL player. And I know a lot of people don't like analytics, but it seems like he and the Leafs use analytics quite heavily with who they kind of target and address. Um, Again, it's hard to say that they have a good roster because they just keep losing in the playoffs, and people will just keep bringing that up. But I mean, like even acquiring a Giordano, like that to me is just such a quality move at this point in his career and to get him for cheap, right? So Ottawa, like you said, I know people have said to Pittsburgh is the other team that's very heavily rumored for Dubas, and Ottawa has actually been rumored. That was brought up. I think Elliot Friedman might have even brought that up. Somebody notable brought it up um, as a potential fit, but yeah, people debated between Pittsburgh and Ottawa. I think with Ottawa, I mean, Dubas has reportedly been a fan of the Sens growing up, right? I think people have said he might not get the credit for the Sens because he didn't construct their core, but I don't know. Like he comes in and the Sens are on the verge of winning. They're on the verge of success, and I think he's just desperate to win at this point. Could they get him? I think it is a real possibility, and I think that yeah, he would bring the pro scouting side of things to the table. And the contracts are signed in Ottawa. Like the only contract he's got to worry about is Jake Sanderson and Jacob Chicker when they come up, right? And DeBrincat if he's not done. But I mean, most of the core is under contract, so we can fault him for signing Matthews and Marner and Tavares, but he won't have to do that here. Like the big names are signed. Now he's just got to fill out the holes. It's just about filling out the holes and working with the coach, whoever he would decide to bring in. I'm sure he'd switch it up to build a winning team. And I don't know. I mean, you can say he hasn't won in Toronto. Maybe that's valid. Maybe that's a valid reason to avoid him. But for me, I really like Kyle Dubas, and I don't blame him or Keefe for Toronto's faults.
That's the thing too. And look, we're talking a lot about the Leafs, but it's a big story because yeah, they're a top team that has lost all the time, so they have to change something. So obviously, there's going to be a lot of assets that they have, management and coaching included, that I'm going to covet as a team that hasn't been in the playoffs in 6 years. So that's kind of part of it. But also, like a lot of people when I throw Sheldon Keefe were like, I want to, we need a coach who can win. I can't think off the top of my head of a coach who recently, I'm talking like maybe the last 15 years, who's won a cup in two different places. I know that people have made it to the finals. I know Peter Laviolette, I think, was the coach in Carolina, and then I know he made it to the finals a couple of years later with another team. But maybe Pete DeBoer, but he hasn't won a cup. Like he's had success everywhere he's gone. So that to me, like if Craig Berube becomes available, and he's a coach, I don't want him though. He's the same. He's DJ Smith. Like they're the same coach, and the Blues suck this year. So like you want a guy who wins, but I think a guy like Keefe has proven that he's a good coach. There's no reason like okay, I think Sens fans sometimes have the Leaf goggles on too. We went over Minnesota. Do you remember when we kind of went through their um, playoff drought?
Yep.
Uh, they haven't won in the first round like ever. They've made the second round once, I think. And Dean Evison, who I think if he became available tomorrow, Sens fans, everyone would be like, "Yeah, I want him. I want him." We just are so hyper focused on Toronto that's why Sheldon Keefe is like, "Oh no, he can't win." Neither can Evison. He hasn't done anything in the playoffs, and he's had very good teams. So that's where it's kind of frustrating a little bit. And the same goes for Dubas. It's like you can't just like guys who win don't leave the places they win for a long, long time. And if you want a winner, Joel Quenneville's out there, but that's another bag of pucks you got to unpack, right? Like I don't know, man. It's just
That's a
it's
good point. Yeah, it's like everybody wants a coach who has success in the playoffs, but coaches who have success in the playoffs don't get fired. Like, unless you're looking years back, right? We could look years back and, oh, in 2015, this guy won in the playoffs, or Peter Laviolette won in the playoffs back then. Whatever it is, fine. But if we're talking recently and recent success, like coaches who are winning don't get fired. You're not going to find a coach that makes it to the Stanley Cup final or wins the cup who gets fired the year after. Like, it you have to factor in regular season success, and I think a lot of people overlook that. Like, we're a little hyper focused on the playoffs, like you're saying.
okay. Here's something fun. Okay, so 2010 Blackhawks, 11 Bruins, Kings in 2012, then Blackhawks again, Kings, and then Blackhawks. Okay, that takes us to 2015. That's six cups handed out. Three different coaches, three different teams. Claude Julien's the one who's available with the Bruins from the 2011 team. He's the only other one. All three of those guys are available, and I'm thinking back in my head. Then 2016 is the Penguins. Penguins again. Barry Trotz's not an option. He's in. He was with Washington. Then Craig Berube. Then John Cooper, and then Jared Bednar and whoever this year. Like the only available guys who have won a cup in the last 23 years are Joel Quenneville, who's a non-option for me, and then Daryl Sutter, who's a terrible coach. Like you can't get a winner because there are no winners available. That's the thing. It's like there's only one coach who wins every year. It's a very rare spot. And maybe people mean just pushing playoff success. Like Rod Brindamore's had success in the playoffs, but they haven't won anything yet. Like maybe something like that is what people are trying to get at. But I don't know, man. It's just like I said, the Sens' goal is to make playoffs and then go from there. I don't know if I'm going to blame a coach for not getting a team like Toronto past the first round in 4 straight years.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and even pushing playoff success, like just making it to the 3rd round or whatever, I don't know. Like, there's still not a lot of coaches who do that and then get fired shortly after. If we're talking recently, right? If we're not looking back 10 years. Um, but even still, like, yeah, there's not a lot. Like, new coaches are becoming a more common thing, like we saw with DJ, and I think a lot of coaches are gonna be a lot of those older coaches are gonna be kind of thrown out the door now. But Sheldon Keefe too, I mean, he's only coached Toronto as a head coach, and he's done the way I look at it is for him is he's done a good job in the regular season, a great job even in the regular season over the last 4 years. Like, he's built like, we talk about winning, but he has won. I mean, winning 50 plus games in each of the last few years is very notable and a very, accomplished thing. Um, can he get a different core and a different team into the playoffs? Yes, I think so. If they're Ottawa's level, can they win in the playoffs? I mean, probably, but a lot of it relies on the players. Coaches can only do so much, anyways. I mean, a lot of it does come down to the core, and a lot of the time, players get the coach fired. I mean, more often than not, really, it comes down to player success. It's not usually like, oh, the coach was completely at fault for this playoff failure, right? I mean, most usually, I'd say it's because of the players. Toronto, I say it's because of the players, and yeah, I mean, I'm totally in agreement with you there. Um, I don't know. I don't have anything else to add on it. Like, I think he'd be a good option. I think most coaches would because Ottawa has good players. I just when I say I want a coach with success and who's proven, I don't mean winning a cup. I just mean someone who has shown they can lead a team to the playoffs, and then from there it's anyone's guess, right? I mean, just give me a coach who I know can win. DJ Smith has not won anything. Give me a coach who
Yeah.
I know can win enough games in the regular season to get into the playoffs. And in the playoffs, it's a lot of it's on the players, right? Like just it's on the core. So yeah, just give me a proven coach who I know can get them to the playoffs.
And and we will leave it at that. But like that's the point. It's like that's why we talk about Gerard Gallant. That's why we're talking about Keefe. It's like these big names who are probably going to be on the market. And by the time people are listening to this, they might know that Keefe is fired because I believe it was on Twitter that Dubas is scheduled to do his end of year press conference. Blah blah blah. But yeah, so that's all just it's all speculation. We're not going based off any tweets or anything like that. Like it's just our kind of personal preference. But I was just I was pretty surprised at the reaction to the turmoil against Sheldon Keefe because I think again he would be a major upgrade in Ottawa and he would get the team to the playoffs. So at that, Brendan, excuse me, we will leave it there. Obviously, like we said at the top of the show, if you're listening to this now, all the bids are due for the Ottawa Senators as of Monday, May 15th. We have no indication of what the next steps are. It could be decided by Tuesday. The Ottawa Senators could have new owners, or it could be a couple of weeks. But we will see. So thank you, everyone, for tuning into episode 7. Please like, comment, and subscribe on the YouTube page. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. And stop by next time for episode 8. That will be coming your way on Friday.